Welcome to my very first Walking Dead Daryl Dixon Season 3 episode review video. Sorry this video is out late. I looked for the episode about Sunday morning, about 2 o'clock, 2:01 in the morning, and it wasn't available on any streaming platform. I checked YouTube Premium, I checked AMC itself, and I checked Amazon. So that's when I was going to watch it, and then I just got so consumed with my Dexter content that I had to kind of postpone the Walking Dead Daryl Dixon. So typically I will watch the episodes early on Sunday mornings as soon as they're available, and then I will post my review before I go to bed. So you should expect in the future the reviews to be available somewhere in between 4 and 5 in the morning, assuming the episode is actually available on the AMC Plus platform that I'm trying to watch it on. But if you haven't seen the first 2 seasons of The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon, or Season 2, which is called The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon, The Book of Carol, or this first episode of The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon Season 3, it would be my recommendation that you don't watch this detailed review any further to avoid any potential spoilers. We start off with Daryl and Carol making their way through the English countryside in a deserted town, and Daryl notices Carol's interest in an old can of hot dogs that she had found, which Carol wants to save for a special occasion or to trade with if they can ever find anyone. And Carol suggests that the survivors could be in a safe zone somewhere. But Daryl finds the lack of any walkers to just be weird, and then Daryl has to reassure Carol that his right shoulder is all right after, Cadrone's knife, but it didn't go too deep. And then he tells Carol that Cadrone had gone crazy after hallucinating his dead brother, as what we saw in the season 2 finale. And then Carol says, "Guess that's why they just called it batshit crazy." And then Daryl says, "I was pretty young when all this started. Never got to do much, never had much. Yeah, growing up, it was my brother and I against the world. Then the world changed. Now all we do is run and fight. That ain't no way to live." And Carol, of course, agrees with the sentiment, and they continue moving. And then Daryl and Carol reach London, which is overgrown and partially reclaimed by nature, but still fairly intact as they cross the Westminster Bridge, which has littered and abandoned cars and barricades. Carol tells Daryl that she keeps thinking about how far they are away from home. While it was hard for her there without Daryl, after everything, Carol is ready to get back, which is a sentiment that Daryl, of course, agrees with as they walk past a skeleton. A sign at the Westminster checkpoint warns travelers to observe overflow in at night or shot on sight. 2 more skeletons are in front of the checkpoint, presumably curfew breakers, while someone has spray painted SOD, S-O-D, off on the front. Like everything else so far, the checkpoint is abandoned with no signs of survivors. Daryl and Carol pass through, walking past an abandoned British military tank with scorch marks on it as they continue their way into London. Daryl and Carol make their way through the city, and Carol laughs at a sign warning people to mind the squid. The 2 spot a walker trapped in a phone booth and more along the street, having been dormant for so long that the walkers had become overgrown by vegetation from both direction on the street, and a massive herd closes in on Daryl and Carol. With no other choice, Daryl and Carol open fire on the walkers, and Daryl with his crossbow and Carol with her pistol. As Carol tries to break through the door of a nearby apartment building, Daryl switches to his Morningstar and knife, keeping the walkers off of her before helping her push through. Inside, the 2 are blocked by a gated door. As Daryl holds off the walkers, Carol breaks through the glass and opens the gate. Once inside, Carol closes the gate, which keeps the herd out of the building. The building is as ruined and overgrown as the city outside. On the top floor, Carol grabs a fire extinguisher off the wall and uses it to break down one of the apartment doors. The 2 explore the very posh apartment where the male resident has hung himself from the chandelier and reanimated. Daryl and Carol split up as they search for anything useful, with Daryl finding some hard candy as the walker, agitated by his presence, continues to move around. Suddenly, the chandelier breaks and the hanging walker drops to the ground, while a second walker, a woman, attacks Daryl from the other direction. As Carol moves to investigate a third walker, a younger female attacks her. Daryl smashes the second walker over the head twice with a cricket bat, and then uses the broken bat to stab the hanging walker in the head. Carol smashes her walker in the head with a glass jar and the fire extinguisher before finally inserting the nozzle in the walker's mouth and freezing its head. With the apartment clear, Daryl and Carol walk out onto the balcony and see that the once empty streets below are now flooded with thousands of walkers stuck with no way out. Daryl offers Carol a piece of candy. Then days later, Daryl and Carol are still trapped in the apartment, and Carol observes the herd with a small pair of binoculars, seeing that a building down the street also has walkers in it, but no signs of other people. Daryl returns from having searched the rest of the building, only having come up with a bottle of Misty Harbor beer. "Fuck those Scots. This sucks," complains Daryl. The walkers aren't going away, and Daryl and Carol are facing possible starvation, which is presumably what killed the two walkers who hadn't died of suicide. Daryl suggests trying to break out at dawn, which is likely suicide, but at least they can go down fighting. Carol agrees and decides to open her can of hot dogs for their last meal, and then Daryl notices a light shining in through the window and breaks a mirror, using it to signal back to a possible survivor in a building across the city. Although Carol dismisses it as just being the reflection of the sun, the two head back inside to share the beer. That night, Daryl and Carol are awakened by a noise of something moving on the roof. The two position themselves at the balcony doors as a man rappels down from the roof. The man nervously introduces himself as Julian Chamberlain and offers up 2 rabbits as food. As the group enjoys the food and single malt whiskey, Julian identifies himself as the last Englishman in England, at least as far as he knows. Julian hasn't seen another living person in many years and was excited when the squid, Julian's name for the undead, started acting up. Julian explains that the name comes from a rhyme which he recites to the two. The walkers led Julian to Daryl and Carol via the roofs, which is why it took so long for him to reach them. Julian had to go all the way to Oxford Street and climb to the top of Century Point just to serpentine his way down to the apartment building. Carol is impressed that Julian had survived all the time by himself, while Julian is impressed that they had survived the Chanel. Julian notes that the British had settled the Chanel off to protect themselves from Europe, and things were manageable for a while until they weren't. Both the walkers and people got out of control, leading to England's fall, when after each other broke off into tribes. Looking to blame somebody, people tried to flee, but the country was all sealed up, meaning that at first no one could get in and no one could get out when things went bad. Years ago, Julian and his friends were planning on trying to get out. However, when the last of his friends died, Julian gave up as he figured that it must be the same everywhere and he couldn't sail the boat alone. This catches Daryl and Carol's interest. And then after dinner, the three sit down and raise a toast to America and the Americans, although Daryl and Carol discreetly dump their drinks so that they will remain sober. Carol tells Julian that there's life in America, which could be a good change for him, suggesting they could all go together. Julian suggests that they stay in England instead. There are plenty of rabbits, even zebra, in Regent's Park, and they could visit Buckingham Palace and sleep in the Queen's bed. Julian jokes that they might even see the zombified Queen Elizabeth II still wandering about. However, Daryl is only interested in the boat, while Carol is more tactful, telling Julian they could have a world too. There's no zebras or palaces. There's people waiting for them back at home, friends that love and miss them. They're waiting for us to come back. That's what makes it home. It could be your home too. Don't you want somebody to miss you? Julian asks if they even know how to sail, and Carol lies that it's how she and Daryl got to Europe in the first place. Convinced, Julian agrees and leaves via the rooftops to gather supplies, ordering Daryl and Carol to meet him out front the next day at 10 a.m. sharp, promising that they'll know when it's time. The next morning, Daryl and Carol watch the streets from the balcony, waiting for Julian. Daryl guesses that Julian bailed out on them, and Carol suggests that they may have been too hard on him. Suddenly, Big Ben begins tolling in the distance, drawing the herd away. Downstairs, Julian explains that he had taught himself how to operate Big Ben over the years to keep the walkers busy for a while. And then Julian brings with him most of the food and supplies that he had stored years ago for the trip that never happened, while the rest of it is already stored on the boat. Julian calls the front of the boat the stern, and Daryl and Carol's fail to catch the deliberate mistake reveals their lie about knowing how to sail. And then Julian admits that he isn't much of a sailor, although he had always wanted to be, even attending the Royal Naval College to learn without success. With how dangerous their planned trip is going to be, the dejected Julian wants to abort. And then, hey, all those assholes you went to school with, they're all squid, right? You ain't. You're the last man standing. We'll follow your lead. We'll be all right, Daryl reassures him. And then outside, Daryl retrieves his dropped crossbow, dropped Morningstar, as well as his fired arrows. Julian reveals that the boat is tucked away safe nearby on the River Thames and leads Daryl and Carol to it. The three set sail, passing under the Tower Bridge as they head out to sea. Julian struggles to plot their location on a map, explaining that the long navigation was the last straw for him. Finding your bearings in the middle of the ocean, no landmarks, no electronics, just tides and time. Compass theory, Proctor yelling about the lives of my crew, their families waiting, all that stands between home and ovulation is me. Panicked under the pressure. However, by every calculation, they are exactly where they're supposed to be. If the wind keeps up, the makeshift crew will make North America in 11 to 17 days. Daryl and Carol cheer at the good news, excited to finally be going home. And then at night, Daryl has what appears to be a flashback of a young boy running and yelling while he thinks that boy has to go now. Carol brings Daryl a cup and assures him that Laurent made it to the Commonwealth. Daryl kept his promise to Isabel to keep the boy safe. Carol tells Daryl that her hallucinations of Sophia in the Channel had felt so real, and it was like Sophia was coming to tell her mother that it was okay to let all of it go. Since then, something lifted, and Carol feels lighter and at peace. She's now kind of excited about what will come next moving forward. While Carol sounds kind of crazy, Daryl jokes that's something that will never change and embraces his friend, genuinely happy for her, and Carol promises Daryl that things will get better for him too. And then Daryl and Julian the next day share a drink, and Julian notes that they will one day come down to the last of its kind, the last bottle of scotch. All of that history and tradition will be gone in a final dream. Julian tells Daryl that he had gone his whole life saving up every penny, thinking that he'd set himself up before Julian found someone to share his life with. Just when Julian felt ready, the world ended and there was no one left to find. Noticing the pensive look on Daryl's face, Julian reassures him that 'tis better to have loved than lost than never have loved. You have the blues, you have Tennyson. Daryl will take blues, and he suggests that Julian might be able to find someone for himself in America, and the two share a toast to the possibilities ahead of them. Julian notices that they're sailing straight into a storm. At night, in the midst of a raging storm, Julian and Daryl bring the sails in a while. Carol works the rudder, the sail gets stuck, and Julian prepares to go help Daryl. A gust of wind swings the boom into his head, leaving him seriously injured. Carol takes Julian below and tends to his head injury while Julian laments such a amateur mistake. Julian tells Carol to get back on the deck and keep the boat into the wind like he showed her. As the storm gets worse, Carol tells Daryl that whatever happens, she's glad that she found him. Daryl insists that nothing is going to happen and they're going home. However, in the distance, a tidal wave approaches the sailboat. The next morning, the storm is over, and Julian's boat lays wrecked on a beach, having been thrown from the wreck. Daryl awakens the beach and rushes to Carol, who is groggy with an apparent concussion from getting hit in the head. Oh shit, this isn't Maine, is it? Realizes Carol. With Carol having trouble moving in her injured state, Daryl goes to the wreck to check for Julian, but he finds the boat's cabin empty. Wandering the beach, Carol spots Julian near the water, but with her blurry vision, fails to notice until it's too late that Julian has died of his injuries and reanimated. Trying to escape, Carol hits Julian with a piece of driftwood with no effect and falls to the ground, with Julian on top of her. As Carol struggles to keep her zombified friend from biting her, Daryl arrives to the rescue, tackles Julian off of Carol, and stabs him in the head, putting Julian down. What a good character. Why'd they kill him off? He was limited and he can only do one episode. And then the two are devastated by Julian's death, and at sunset, Daryl pushes his body out into the ocean, burying Julian at sea. And then that night, the two have set up a campfire amongst the rocks, and Daryl brings Carol some of the scotch and offers to go back to the boat for more food, but she refuses. Carol wonders if they could be stranded on an island in the middle of nowhere, and Daryl tells her that they'll just fix the boat and get unstranded in that case. Daryl discovers an injury on the back of Carol's right shoulder with metal inside of it, and Carol is burning up despite the cold. Over Carol's protest, Daryl returns to the boat to gather the rest of the scotch and some medical supplies to treat the wound with. And then cutting away Carol's shirt around the wound, Daryl discovers that it's infected, meaning he's going to have to cut some stuff out. Daryl sterilizes the wound with the scotch and, with Carol in a lot of pain, successfully removes the piece of metal from her shoulder. Later that night, while standing in the surf, Daryl hears some eerie whistling and notices people carrying torches wearing bone mass in the trees. Daryl hides with Carol and readies his crossbow as the group approaches and the boat. Delirious and burning up, the confused Carol tries to crawl out of their hiding spot and has to be restrained by Daryl. One man on horseback gets close but doesn't find them and joins the others in looting the boat. The next morning, the group is gone, but they have taken all of Daryl and Carol's stuff and trashed everything else. It was more like Julian's stuff. With no other choice, Daryl and Carol set to find some food and get her wound looked at. The two find a sign in both Spanish and English revealing that they're in the nature reserve of Costa Da Morte. "Welcome to Spain, amigo," says Daryl, realizing that they've landed. Daryl and Carol's journey from England didn't get them very far. The two head towards a river, and Daryl spots walkers caught in a net off the distance before blood drips onto him from the walkers caught in the second net right above Daryl and Carol. They agree that they both hate this place. Daryl finds a small shack for them to use as a hideout, and Carol admits that her head and shoulder are both bothering her. Daryl rebandages Carol's shoulder and promises to find them a better place to stay the next day. Worried about Carol's head injury, Daryl suggests staying awake for a little while. Daryl recalls Carol telling him about what she saw back in the Janelle, and Carol accuses him of lying about what he saw, like always. Daryl states that he never lies to her, but Carol clarifies that Daryl always hides what's really going on in his head and heart, which Daryl admits is true. "Something happened to me there too. I was ready to give up. I thought it was all over. Then she was there. I found a fight in me I didn't know I had." Carol admits, like him, she found a fight in her that she didn't know she had. "Let's keep doing that. Let's keep never giving up," Daryl vows. Daryl begins playing I Spy with Carol, who likes the game, and Daryl can't stand the game. The next day, Carol wakes up alone and hears the sound of laughing nearby. Daryl successfully hunts a rabbit with his crossbow and hides from the Humvee full of men driving by. Returning to the shack, Daryl finds no sign of Carol and frantically calls for his missing friend. And that's what ends this Season 3 premiere of The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon. So it's a good episode. I'll give it an 8.2 out of 10. My character of the episode is hands down Julian, and I must say I'm kind of glad there wasn't really a lot of French stuff in this episode, because that shit was getting on my nerves. Now, Spanish stuff is going to be difficult too, but I think I can say those words a little bit better than this French stuff. I couldn't stand the French dialogue and all that, and the words and the episode titles. So, a good start. I'm getting kind of burned out of The Walking Dead. It's no secret. It's not even my favorite show anymore, though Dexter has surpassed it, but who knows? So, you've heard everything I have to say. Now it's your turn. If you're a fan of The Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon, and you want to help me out with the YouTube algorithm, please make sure that you Hulk smash the like button, share the video with a friend, put this video on any one of your social media platforms. Don't forget to sound off in the comment section about what your thoughts are on this episode of The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon. What would you rate this episode? Who would be your character of the episode? And then last but certainly not least, don't forget to hit that sub button. You're watching the video anyway. Subscribe to the channel. Help me get over 100k subs. Yes, I know I set my goals high. Join the team, show your damn support, and be a part of something special. And you never know what you're going to see on JDev TV.